I'm Eddie Muller, welcoming you back to Noir Alley. This week we detour from the familiar urban terrain of American noir to a European nation gripped by fear, hatred, and delusion. The film is Address Unknown, a prestige offering from Columbia Pictures in 1944 that clocks in at a swiftly paced 75 minutes. Now, within that span, you are going to see more cinematic artistry than you'd get in 8 or 10 other movies of this era combined. Much of it involves expressionistic camera work and art direction that will look familiar to fans of film noir. Only here, it serves a story with a deeper thematic significance than you'll find in the typical crime thriller. Harry Cohn is remembered by movie historians as the most vulgar of studio bosses, with hundreds of expletive-filled anecdotes to prove it. But it should also be remembered that during World War II, Harry Cohn was the only studio head with the guts to make films about what was actually happening in Nazi Germany. The 1944 Columbia picture None Shall Escape, released just months before Address Unknown, was extraordinary for being the first film to depict the government-sanctioned murder of Jews. And the film's notion of an international tribunal holding Nazis to account predicted the Nuremberg trials that were less than 2 years away. Address Unknown was written by Cressman Taylor in 1938. During a trip through Europe, the writer had been unnerved by the terror Nazis unleashed on the continent, and the idea for Address Unknown took shape. It comprises correspondence between a San Francisco art dealer, a Jew, and a German expatriate, a Gentile, who has returned to his homeland. Taylor originally sold the terse manuscript to Story magazine, America's most esteemed journal of short fiction. Editor Whit Burnett made only a single drastic change. He insisted that Catherine Cressman Taylor drop her first name, since the story was, quote, too strong to appear under the name of a woman. Eventually published by Simon & Schuster in 1939, the book became a sensation for the intimate, inexorable way it depicted a relationship between best friends torn apart by the rise of fascism. Over the years, the book's stature and its relevance has steadily increased, especially overseas. In France alone, it sold more than 600,000 copies. The movie rights were purchased by producer-director Sam Wood. In truth, he had less interest in the book's anti-fascist theme than he had in using it as a vehicle to boost the movie career of his daughter, Gloria, billed here as K.T. Stevens. To direct the picture, Wood chose his longtime associate, William Cameron Menzies, which is where all the artistry comes in. Menzies was at this point already a legend as a visionary production designer, with films like Things to Come and Gone with the Wind to his credit. But he didn't need a large-scale production to display his formidable skills. He's got barely more than a B budget on this one, but the visual impact is astonishing. Working from an adaptation by Lester Cole and a final script by Herbert Dalmas, Menzies sketched out the entire story, 800 finely rendered compositions that he'd bring to life with cinematographer Rudolph Maté. As a director, Menzies' pictorial style is as bold as the work of silent cinema greats like Sergei Eisenstein and Carl Theodor Dreyer. In 1944, nothing else in American movie theaters looked quite like this. Paul Lukas, a Hungarian Jew, knew Taylor's book and lobbied for the central role of Martin Schultz, and his casting proved fortuitous. A month before the film's premiere, he won the Best Actor Oscar for Watch on the Rhine, a much more romantic movie about World War II. His wife here is played by Austrian actress Mädi Christians, who'd been a star in Germany before fleeing to America during the rise of the Third Reich. For many European expats in the cast, including Austrian Karl Esmond and German Peter van Eyck, making this film was a way of personally spitting in Hitler's eye. Of course, both the book and the movie were banned in Germany for decades. Address Unknown is not your typical war film, which is why it's a timeless story that still resonates with readers and viewers. It's about how a normal person, you, me, our neighbor, gradually becomes a fascist. And why Address Unknown slipped into obscurity is a mystery, especially since it's the most perfectly realized film on the directorial resume of William Cameron Menzies. Millions more people have seen his campy 1953 sci-fi classic, Invaders from Mars, than have seen this film. Now, whatever the reason for its neglect, Noir Alley is thrilled to throw a spotlight on one of the most powerful and artistic films to emerge from Hollywood during World War II. Here is Address Unknown. Although he does not receive on-screen credit, Lester Cole, who adapted the novel Address Unknown for the screen, deserves credit for giving it an extra dimension. He changed the character of Griselle from Max's sister to his daughter and added a fiancé, Heinrich, to the mix. And this allows Max to retain his ingenuous naivete, while Heinrich devises the idea of murder by mail to avenge Griselle's death. Now, if movies had never learned how to talk, William Cameron Menzies may have been one of the greatest directors of all time. As a visual stylist, he was second to none. But as a director of actors, they were pretty much on their own. He didn't really elicit performances from his cast. He used them as graphic elements in a pictorial symphony, the emotion coming from the images less than the acting, not to discount the very effective performance of Paul Lucas. During the silent era, Menzies was a protege of influential art director Anton Grot. His initial claim to fame was designing the 1924 production The Thief of Baghdad, still considered one of the greatest fantasy films of all time. In 1936, Alexander Korda brought him to England to design and direct the speculative science fiction masterpiece Things to Come, written by H.G. Wells. Its amazing production values convinced David O. Selznick that Menzies was the man to help him bring Gone with the Wind to life. Menzies illustrated every shot in that movie. He designed the film's dramatic color scheme, and he directed several of its most vivid sequences, including the burning of Atlanta and Scarlett's search through the wounded Confederate soldiers. Other than Selznick, Menzies was the only member of the Gone with the Wind production team involved in every step of its creation, start to finish. And for his work, Menzies got a singular credit on the film: this production designed by William Cameron Menzies. Of course, there was no such Oscar category, so Lyle Wheeler won the Oscar for Best Art Direction. Selznick pulled a few strings, however, and Menzies was given a special one-time Oscar for use of color for the enhancement of dramatic mood. Of course, it was Menzies' production design that allowed Selznick to maintain visual continuity while using three different directors. One of those, the uncredited Sam Wood, recognized that Menzies had precisely the skills he lacked as a director. And the two formed a unique production partnership in which they were essentially co-directors. They produced a string of memorable movies, all with a sole director credit for Sam Wood: Our Town, The Devil and Miss Jones, King's Row, Pride of the Yankees, For Whom the Bell Tolls, and Ivy. Address Unknown was the only one of their collaborations on which Menzies received a directing credit. And despite the rave reviews Address Unknown received, Menzies showed little enthusiasm for continuing as a director. For him, the creation of the film was achieved on his drawing board. And a bit like Alfred Hitchcock, the actual shooting of the film was more a chore than a creative challenge. He did become a well-paid ghost director, brought in to figure out creative solutions to productions that had gone off the rails. As his biographer James Curtis noted, Menzies was more interested in having challenging work and doing it well than he was in getting credit for it. Now, by whatever label you apply, director, production designer, art director, William Cameron Menzies was one of the most talented and visionary creators in movie history. Well, let us know what you thought of Address Unknown on our Noir Alley Facebook page and Twitter feed. But don't bother if all you're going to say is that wasn't noir. I know that, but I wasn't about to pass up a chance to showcase the genius of William Cameron Menzies, or prove that some films from the 1940s will always be relevant. Next week, I'll be back with something from another cinema giant, Fritz Lang. It's the last picture he made in America, the 1956 release Beyond a Reasonable Doubt, starring Dana Andrews and Joan Fontaine. Until then, see you in the shadows.